now we're into Module 4, and we'll be talking about reasoning and decision-making. But first, what we're going to do is sort of talk about some of the moral questions that are involved in becoming a good critical thinker. So part of what we'll be touching on in this module are the reasons, the moral reasons, as to why one ought to take one's responsibility as a critical thinker seriously. So we'll be thinking about the moral basis for trying to become a good decision maker, the moral grounds for doing so, and we'll be speaking a little bit about, in the next section, the next video, about the epistemic virtues and vices, more in the text. And what we're going to do in this module is concentrate on a real-life issue, the issue of childhood vaccination. And we'll look at a decision that you'll make if you decide to become a parent, the decision as to whether or not you should vaccinate your children against common diseases, or, well, I suppose maybe not so common anymore because of vaccination. This is a complicated issue, and what we're going to look at is well, we're going to look at a range of questions. We're going to look at the issue itself. We're going to begin with an Australian television program where the host is critical of a news report that seems to present both sides of the vaccination debate as equals. So according to this person's criticism, the arguments of the anti-vaccination campaigners simply don't deserve to be treated as though they have equal weight as the judgments of scientists and doctors. So, on the one hand, you might think, well, isn't it always a good idea to have balance in decision-making? Isn't it always a good idea to have, quote-unquote, both sides of an issue presented? Well, maybe not. So, for example, if you were asked if you had to make a decision, let's say, concerning whether or not a tornado was on its way to Lawrence, Kansas, you could refer to the National Weather Service, to some meteorologist, etc., for his or her best judgments. And I suppose you could also, call your Uncle George, the psychic weather predictor, and ask him if he'd had one of his famous headaches. So Psychic George might claim to be able to predict tornadoes. So let's say Psychic George says that there won't be a tornado, and let's say you are in charge of the television station here in Lawrence, and you have this choice. Well, you have this decision to make. Should I present both sides of this issue? On the one hand, I have the National Weather Service telling me that there's a tornado watch in Lawrence, but on the other hand, I have Psychic George. Now, clearly in this case, we wouldn't think it's a wise idea to have a quote-unquote balanced presentation of the issues. So you wouldn't give equal time, for example, to Psychic George at the end of the weather forecast. So you wouldn't say, well, the meteorologists tell us that a tornado's on its way, perhaps, but Psychic George says not to worry, everything's fine. Let's go now to Psychic George and investigate this further. There seems to be a genuine disagreement, etc., etc. So not all disagreements from that case would be worthy of presenting both sides, as we'd say, would be worthy of a sort of balanced presentation. But what about the case of childhood vaccination? Is that as easily dismissed? And so what we're going to do is we'll look at the issue itself, and what we're going to do then is examine in detail during the discussion one reasonably reasonably lucid and reasonably good presentation of the anti-vaccination position from a Hollywood celebrity. We'll look at the arguments that this celebrity gives, and then we'll critically examine the arguments step by step. And in the background, I'd like you to be thinking about some of the moral questions. So clearly, in the case of whether or not to vaccinate my child, there is a basic moral responsibility that a parent has. There's also the responsibilities one might have as a member of a larger community, and one's public health responsibilities with respect to that community, and a whole bunch of issues that we'll look at, I hope, during the discussion. Okay, thanks.